today. We are here as a part of what's becoming an ongoing work in examining mental health. Our first convening regarding this topic was on mental health in the Global South, regarding establishment of delivery of mental health programs for the beneficiaries. But due to very popular demand, we are offering today a discussion on self-care for those working to serve others, because we certainly recognize there's a huge rate of burnout and depression and also just mental exhaustion, frankly, from dealing with what Susanna Calvert and I discussed as basically trying to be superheroes, both men and women. I sometimes think that's a little harder for women to overcome that need to be that superhero and do everything based on societal demands. But regardless, it's also a very difficult area for men as well, particularly those who have this kind of a calling to work in the Global South, and for people living in dire poverty, and know that not only is your work either as a CEO or a program delivery person or a development officer here in the United States is so stressful, that because of the knowledge of how dire the poverty is that you're trying to eliminate, and the needs of working often in multiple time frames, and then still try to have some kind of a private life, and then deal with what sometimes I think amounts to a great deal of guilt. Even funders, I have found, have an awful lot of guilt surrounding the fact that it is simply impossible for us to be everything to everyone. We have it, I think, easier than those that have to go out and actually do the work, drumming up the money or seeing the actual things that take place on the ground with beneficiaries of programs. But it's definitely overdue for focus to be trained on this particular area. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Susanna Calvert, who has a degree, an MAPP and a PhD, hence her doctor title. And she is the founder and executive director of the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, which works to help all of humanity to become resilient in their mental, emotional, and relationship health and well-being. This is following her 26-year career in higher education, during which time she's published nearly 100 journal articles, books, and book chapters, as well as hundreds of blogs for magazines and blogs and journals such as Psychology Today, Brains Magazine, and the Silver Lining blog. Additionally, she is a radio host and consultant who works to help individuals and organizations achieve their highest versions of herself through her private practice. And she is also a practicing Reiki master, energy healer, and intuitive, which I could see her every day, I suspect, and be very happy. Plus, I enjoy talking with her, so it would be a double treat. Second, I'd like to introduce Nancy Mortifee, who is the Dean of Inner Work Programs at the Wellbeing Project, which offers participants an opportunity to engage in their own internal exploration with the support of skilled facilitators and in the company of fellow travelers. These tend to be group seminars that take place, I believe, over a 2-year period. I'll let Nancy tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And this project also offers a program for organizations wishing to undergo this journey. And Nancy's colleague, Linda, was not able to be with us here today at the last minute to talk about their organizational seminars, but maybe Nancy could fill us in just a little bit on that as well. In addition to this work, Nancy also has a private practice that's devoted to mindfulness, intimacy, and well-being training. And she is the co-author of a book called Mind Power for Children, a guide for parents and teachers, which has been translated into 6 languages, and also the school-based mindfulness education for children program. Last but definitely not least, I want to introduce to everyone Natalie Rekstad, who is the founder of and CEO of Black Fox Philanthropy, a leading fundraising strategy firm that is serving global NGOs and which exists to accelerate the social sector's effectiveness in solving complex problems on a global scale. Natalie also, as a part of her work, helps to build fundraising capacity for NGOs through a series of trainings that are held around the world. She's a delegate to the UN Council on the Status of Women and serves on the Global Advisory Board of World Pulse. Additionally, she's been featured in dozens of local and national media outlets, including CBS, NBC, and the Huffington Post, and herself is the author of an award-winning children's book called The Adventures of Anonymous, which focuses on random acts of kindness and philanthropy for children ages 3 to 6, and has, I believe, been translated into 10 languages and has served about 1 million, I forget the exact number, Natalie, I'm sorry, about 1 million children worldwide?
I'm not sure of the exact numbers anymore. That was a few years ago through the Think Equal curriculum, which is attached to the UN.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for filling us in with that blank in my knowledge. So now that we've kind of introduced everybody, I would really like to start our conversation today by asking each of you, what led you or your organization to note the need for better mental well-being in the nonprofit sector? Susanna, I will come back to you first because you and I had an interesting conversation earlier this week about your journey out of higher education and into your current role.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for the invitation to join all of you today. I'll keep my story brief because I know we have a lot to cover, but I guess the short answer is that I'm the daughter of 2 refugees from the Chinese communist government, and so I was living my Chinese American values and going down my checklist of ingredients for happiness. And the worst thing that ever happened to me was that I got everything I ever wanted. Because instead of being blissfully happy, I was really quite a mess, train wreck. And so my most recent accomplishment, what I thought would be my crowning jewel, which was tenure, I promptly pretty much gave it back, which I think was the first in the history of my university, and went on a search for meaning and purpose and authenticity. And it was going really well. I switched over into helping people develop, their ability to thrive and be more resilient, which is what we're doing in my current nonprofit. But I was doing that in the university until shortly into that, I moved to the University of Georgia. I lost my husband and sister to cancer. So I went on a spiritual journey and realized that I had a dream for the larger world beyond higher ed. So I gave it all up and put all my savings into starting the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, seeing it as the need that the offering that the world needs right now.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing. That's very personal story. I deeply appreciate it, and that certainly resonates with me, as I'm sure it does many people, if not all the people here today. Natalie, you're appearing in my box next, so I'm going to turn to you. I know you've been a long time practitioner of self-care, which is understandable. You travel all the time. You run a very busy lifestyle. I know you're the mother of a young daughter, and you're, I think, maybe a single mom. I've never heard you mention a husband or a partner that is present with you. And so you exemplify the kind of person that needs to find ways for self-care to prevent burnout. What was it that caused you to start developing your own areas of self-care and examination?
Yeah, good question. Well, like Susanna, my own journey toward burnout was a big driver, although I had wellness practices long before, but in 2020, early 2021, Black Fox Philanthropy doubled in size virtually overnight. And we didn't have the infrastructure back then to handle the volume. And so I was working staggering hours. My team was working long hours just to keep up with the demand. And so by necessity, I needed to check in on well-being of the team, especially with, people in fear on a number of levels, financial, health, and more. And yet I was running on fumes myself. But at the same time, the leaders that we were serving, I was in conversation with them as well. And they were flat out also with no end in sight. The stakes were so high. We didn't feel as though we could change the pace or slow the pace because the world was on fire with COVID. NGOs were literally having to shutter their doors, and unless they got the funding they needed to do their work in the world, in their communities. And in some cases, it was life or death in some of these communities. And so the need became even far more acutely aware. And my daughter's now 18. She's headed to Bryn Mawr College. So I'm breathing so much. I have far more spaciousness now. So I'll also name that. But actually the DNA of Black Fox Philanthropy is centered on being very women friendly, very family friendly, with future of work kind of mindset around we want everyone to be at the school play and make the lunches and be the room parent and the soccer coach and all the things that I got to do. So we even set up the company actually originally in that way for high achieving, really women who were so extraordinary, had so much to contribute, former Bain, former McKinsey, in my case, former executive, but didn't want to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. So it was baked into our DNA already. And yet the world turned upside down in 2020. And I found myself really, truly in burnout. I mean, I kept going through the burnout until the right infrastructure was put in place. But it was brutal. It was a monkey knife fight for a lot of us during that time. And again, the stakes were so high, so we didn't feel like we could stop.
Yes, I understand that. We experienced some of that at our foundation along the route of we suddenly had no money available to give away during COVID, and we found ways to cope with it. But I was in let's say a prayerful mode pretty much every day from March 2020 on through about December of 2021. And not so much as it was certainly stressful, but it was also you get back to that guilt. I would come back to the guilt thing, but there was a fear factor, which I think is key to our discussion today. And because again, some of my conversations and preparing today with our panelists, we've been talking a lot about fear-based mentality and what that does to you, and that pretty much all problems are fear-based mentality. The guilt certainly is coming out of a fear-based mentality, but I felt guilty that we were not able to do more than we could do as a very small family foundation that had very little depth financially to fall back on in this kind of time, similar to what you were describing with Black Fox and some of your beneficiaries' clientele. So with that, I'm with my comment there, I'm going to turn on to Nancy. How did you come to this work, and what made you notice how imperative it was?
Well, I have my own story personally, but I think that, and it's very much along the lines of what we've heard already. You know, the dark night of the soul, when you realize that everything that you're putting your heart and soul into and your energy into, and then you're just too exhausted to enjoy it. You're just too absent to actually be present. And so that happened to me many years ago. But how I got involved with the Wellbeing Project is maybe more of interest, or how that Wellbeing Project started.
Yes.
It was really a call to respond to these various issues that you're bringing up. I work with social change leaders, entrepreneurs from around the world who have all committed their lives to changing world problems in a unique, inspiring way. So really moving the dial from like, no, this is no way this is going to happen, to yes, it can happen, and this is how it does it, and we can scale it around to many countries. So all of those people have been celebrated. They're all notable. They're all well known. They speak with their presidents. They're the ones who are celebrated constantly, and yet each one of them, like each one of us, goes to bed at night saying, "Have I done enough? Am I enough? Maybe I could do more. What's wrong with me? Why not I happy? Why don't I, the passion that I started this with, now I don't even want to get up in the morning and go to work." And so we work with people who have come to a place where they're curious about another path that they might take. And just 1 second, if you could hold on for 1 sec.
I got in the chat, Lauren, I hope you don't mind I mention this, but she shared that when she was pregnant, a coworker had gifted her the children's book, The Secret Adventures of an Mouse.
Oh, really?
Okay. Sorry about that. We have a house full of people here, and everybody's chatting. And so I had to
Shoo them away.
That's quite all right.
That's
That's okay. I have, as you all probably saw earlier, a beautiful cat here who is very affectionate and is thinking he's going to jump across my computer screen again, and I'm trying to discourage that. So you gave me an opportunity to let him know that wasn't going to happen.
Well,
and
we've all been charmed.
I'll thank you. I'll also take the opportunity to mention to people, if you have questions as they arise, please put them in the chat box, and we will get them filtered out as we come to more general Q&A time. So Nancy, please continue.
Okay. Well, I think probably the most interesting would be listening to the questions that people have come up with and addressing those as they show up. I love the talk about the cat. We were also charmed by that happening in the beginning times of COVID, but it's become a reality for all of us, and it's made it more difficult for the people that we serve and the people who are serving, because of the separation that many of us have experienced with the people that we care most about. So anyway, Emily, I'm going to turn over to you and see if there's any questions people are ready to, or another panelist wants to speak.
We can absolutely do that. I'm kind of thinking we might wait just a little bit longer, because people are probably coming with a desire to gain knowledge, and as we talk a little bit more, they'll be able to generate questions. But thank you for offering them that opportunity. I'm going to take that back just for a few minutes.
Okay.
I'm wondering, instead, would you talk to us a little about what kind of solutions and how your organization works to help others to relieve the mental exhaustion, depression, and burnout from these factors, and overcome fears through your, I mentioned like a 2-year-long program that for inner work. Also, I know you have the one on organizational work as well.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak briefly about that. So in response to this really worldwide need of change makers, we created, to start with, an 18-month program, close to 2 years, 18-month program where we brought together a small group of entrepreneurs who are going through these challenges, and we gave them an intense, in-depth experience of inner work exploration. Now, when we hear the word mental health, we think, in our terms, we think of mental, emotional, spiritual health. And by spiritual, I don't mean religious. I mean just what's going on inside, and how are we connected to others. So I see that it's even more important to keep that idea of emotional in the body experience. So what we do is we have a variety of different facilitators who are highly skilled and come and work with our folks. We do individual sessions with them. We find participants or facilitators in their own city that they can work with. It's a really full-on caring, support, and holding of these people that are coming through the program. And we've done 5 groups as that so far, and we're now going to do 2 more groups. And in addition, we held a summit last year where 1,000 people came from all over the world to Bilbao, Spain. because
Fabulous.
it's a movement. It's a
Mhm.
movement. We're all feeling the urge. We have to make a difference here. You know, the way we've been managing lives it's not going well enough. So yeah, so now so I'm happy to talk about the ways that we have done that, you know, very practical kind of solutions. I wouldn't know if I would use that. I hope that there's solutions for some, but certainly ways to get people on track a little more with their personal self-care.
Fabulous. And I do want to talk about those solutions. Pardon
Okay.
me, I should have turned my phone off earlier. We'll just put it on mute. But I do want to ask Susanna, how does this mesh with the work you do at the foundation?
Well, it's really great to hear about your program, Nancy, because we're probably the other end of the spectrum. We have an online educational platform that's a bit more of a do-it-yourself offering that's available 24/7 to anybody with an internet connection. And we offer all of our learning resources to anybody who comes to our website on a gift economy. So in other words, we say, well, here's our suggested tuition, but pay what you're able. And if you can't afford to pay anything at all, please participate anyway. Our modules are also designed to be very experiential and skill focused. So I spent 26 years in higher education doing traditional, you know, college stuff plus professional development. And I just saw all too often that we teach to knowledge as if knowledge is power, period. That's all you need, without necessarily bridging the gap to, well, how do you incorporate this into your life and change your life? So we really focus on that skill development and make it also a flexible option so that if you want to learn on your own, you can go through it on your own. If you want to learn with a partner, you can, it works great there. Or if you have a group of people, that's even better. And that you can, if you are used to holding conversations within guardrails, you can do it. We can send you a guide. We can send a facilitator. We can come and prepare a community of facilitators among your community so that you can sustain and grow this yourself. So we are really designing to scale this to everyone in the world and make it as accessible as possible, and to help people develop the skills that our schools and workplaces are not generally providing, or might be really expensive or not available in your area, and that are so critical to our ability to be resilient and thrive. Obviously, well, I don't know about obviously, I try not to use that word anymore. There is still a great need, because despite our best efforts and a really beautiful growing movement, 76% of adults in the US are having a symptom of mental illness still, despite all we're doing. So we really need to get under the hood much more than we already are. And our platform helps people walk step by step through the process, because as we've all seen, that, you know, even having sufficient material, you know, safety and resources is not a recipe for thriving and being satisfied and finding meaning and purpose, and living the best life you can.
Thanks, Susanna. Natalie, I'm going to ask you, because we've got two great practitioners here with different methodologies of working. Do you know of other organizations that are doing this? You cast a very wide net, so I don't know if you do know of any other organizations, but as Nancy said, it's starting to become a movement. So perhaps you have a further awareness you can add to the mix.
Yeah, actually, I'll hop in and chat. So Catalyst 2030 works a lot in this. And in fact, I came across a wellness, I'll put it in chat, a wellness survey, just to kind of diagnostically, like, where are you? So that's actually, that was exciting to see. School Foundation's incredibly intentional with this, with the community, with their awardees, and also invest in the Wellbeing Project, their partner. And in fact, in 2021, I was a speaker in their wellness hub on the topic of from burnout to bliss. And it goes really deeply into the topic, including actionable insights to get off the bullet train to burnout. I'll put that in there because that gets really granular. Not granular, but it really covers the, what are the drivers that lead us to burnout? And including unconscious commitments. Like in my case, there were still remnants of imposter syndrome. They kept me driving and, and not wanting to let anyone down or wanting to appear competent. And so putting in those extra, so there's these other unconscious commitments, as well as the external demands that are put upon us. And Nancy or Susanna mentioned it earlier, or maybe it was you, Emily, around what, no, it was one of the panelists around what society really demands of us as women. And I came up in the 70s and the Angelique commercial, I can bring bacon. Right. It was
up in a pan. Yes. No one else but us and maybe a few other people here are old enough to remember that. But yes, exactly.
Yeah, but it was the, the 8-hour perfume for the 24-hour woman. And it was this message of, the feminist incredible message of you can be anything, and the media hijacking it into you have to be everything. And so I think I for one definitely ingested that, and I had to look like $1 million while I made the dinner, raised the kids, and pulled down.
Never let him forget he's a man either.
God. Yes, all of it. Ugh. So
Rosella says in the chat she remembers it very well. Thank you.
Tragic. It's so.
I mean,
tragic.
I could actually sing it for you because it's in my head now. So
yes, I'm going to go to bed with that in my head tonight. But that's okay.
I can bring home the bacon, Angelique, fry it up in
a pan,
and never, never, never let you forget you're a man, because I'm a woman, Angelique. Oh my God. America.
That was America. Oh, it gets worse. I won't go. Don't okay. Don't get me started.
All of our convenings, except for our open mic sessions on YouTube channel. So you're now a YouTube star, Rosella.
Oh my God, I love it. That is amazing. Another one is inner development goals. Which is really a brilliant companion to the Sustainable Development Goals. But there are a number of funders who really are very thoughtful about how do they support their grantee partners, recognizing that mental health and well-being is key to sustainability. So those are some that kind of came off the top of my head when I was looking at these questions right before the call. So I was able to pull those links up. But yes, there are many, many more, but thankfully it has come into the collective consciousness. This is an issue, particularly among change agents, right? Social entrepreneurs, we burn so hot. And so we can burn out. I was just in France for a number of weeks, and I was in the south of France where very little English, and the host of the Airbnb, no English, and yet she said the word burnout, and I'm like, I'm sorry. I mean, I was speaking my toddler French, and she said the word burnout. I'm like, she doesn't speak English. Why is she saying burnout? I think I was talking about myself, to be honest. But I was like, wait, is that a French word? She's like, yeah, it's a French word now. But the other phrase that which means we're exporting our workaholism, we're exporting our do more, be more, have more. And the other thing as well that I learned a few years ago, based in France, is they have a term that's je suis crevé. I am a flat tire, which basically means I am like bone deep burnout. I am beyond burnout. And it also means I am roadkill, which totally fits. So it's not just, we know it's not just a US issue, it's a global issue, but, and so anyway, I just wanted to name that because I thought that was pretty extraordinary. Well, maybe not extraordinary. I guess the point is, this is really in the mainstream conversation, fortunately. And so on some level, thank you, pandemic, forcing it into the mainstream conversation. It's kind of a choiceless choice because of what was happening. And so much of what I heard on the stage from the Wellbeing Summit in Bilbao was these incredible leaders holding up the sky for so many. And like I said, we don't feel like we can stop because there's so much resting on us. And so to put the well-being of everyone else ahead of our own actually is a real recipe for disaster. And so here we are, and here are 1,000 of us in this conversation in a very deep, intentional way.
Yes, you cannot take any care of anyone else if you don't take care of yourself first. There's a reason I always think of it as you're on the airplane and they give you the little speech, at the beginning with how to put on the life vest if you should need to, and the little oxygen mask, and they always will drop down out of the ceiling and they say, if you are sitting with a child, put your own oxygen mask on before you try to assist your child in putting on the oxygen mask. And again, you cannot take care of anyone else before you take care of yourself. And so I think that's very valid. And it's interesting what you say to me about France, because France is the country I always think of as the good living country. They take everyone takes the month of August off, and everything just kind of shuts down at that period of time. And they take a month vacation instead of saying, I'm going to cram it into even 2 weeks, which a lot of us then go, no, I'm going to take a week vacation. Then I'm going to save those extra days in my 2-week vacation that I get from my organization for when I want to take a 3-day holiday or make a 3-day holiday weekend into a 4-day holiday weekend and get a little extra rest then. So to hear that they are now worrying about burnout is really remarkable. Yes. Susanna and Nancy, do you have other organizations you want to mention that Natalie, she certainly mentioned quite a few, but do you have other organizations you want to put into the mix that we should know about? I'm hearing no one, I'm seeing no one opening their mouth to speak. So I'm going to just, yes.
I think the whole point of why we're doing what we're doing is because there haven't been organizations doing this.
I agree.
And so we, as the Wellbeing Project, started off as almost a service provider, if you will, looking after as many people as we could do and researching that to show that it was effective. And now we've become a networking organization, bringing all these other large and small foundations and many different kinds of groups, health care professionals and social justice professionals and all kinds of different special interest groups, if you will, because we're starting a movement. We're trying to get everyone to realize it has to be a line item on their budget, inner well-being, personal well-being for the people that work with them. I love what you're doing, Susanna. I think what we're aiming to do more of is having, and we have quite a bit of it now, is to have online resources, free open source resources for people to take home and use. I can offer some suggestions on the chat here at some point, but
perfect.
We want this to be everywhere. And it's actually not just a social change sector, it's everyone.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
and I know Susanna devotes her organization to having available resources also at no to low cost, and which is hugely important from both your ends. I'm going to move us along a little bit because this has been fascinating so far, and I knew going into this we would really only be able to hit the tip of the iceberg on this topic, but at least be able to provide our constituents through these convenings with more information sources than they might have had readily. But in the interest of moving us along, I am going to come back then to saying, to asking Nancy and Susanna, what steps should an individual take? What does one need to do in preparing for self-examination, for self-care? And also conversely, what foundation needs to be in place for an organization to address the mental well-being of its employees?
You want to go ahead, Nancy?
I was hoping you would. No, I'm fine with I'm fine. The steps they would take. Well, first of all, I think we have to realize it's a problem. And I think that's becoming more and more apparent. You know, you don't have to have more than one suicide in the sector to realize that this is a big deal. So identifying the problem and then realizing that it's not just their problem, it's our problem. Everybody's affected by when people overwork and explode. And there are we have come up with, and I'll include an article that I wrote, which is called How to Find Help. You know, there are ways to systematically go through figuring out, starting with, do I need help? I mean, is this unusual that I get 2 hours of sleep most nights? Is it unusual that I, have most of my meals at the fast food restaurant? Is that wrong? Sometimes there's something wrong with the fact that I'm feeling jittery. I mean, there are many different things like that. You know, a lot of times we don't even know because we're bathing in it. We're like fish in water. We're so used to being, and Natalie, you touched on that too, and as did Susanna, and I imagine that others of you would all do this too. You just go along in an atmosphere of overwork and in a way that you just don't even know that there's another way. So first of all, you have to identify that you're in trouble. And there's some ways to do that. And then what do you do next? Where do you find the help? Most of us are too embarrassed to ask for help. So how can we find ways that and we have to change the culture so that people are no longer feeling like it's unusual or wrong to be needing help, that it's actually human and that we all need it. So those are, I think, really important places. Asking around, helping. You know, a lot of people feel really embarrassed about going to see a therapist. I think it's fantastic. I think everybody should have someone to go to talk to who's only about them, right?
Yes.
How often do you get that? Never. Anyway, Susanna, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, agree with all of that. And P.S., I'm a huge fan of therapy. Wish I could go more often, you know. So I have a little bit more of a step-by-step about what you can do on a personal level. And the list is actually the same for the organization. And it does start with what Nancy said. Like, first, you have to recognize that something's wrong. And to me, that starts with being present and being mindful, because if we are not noticing our inner world, we're not going to notice that there is a change that's needed. Once we've noticed that something's not going well, to identify the belief, habit, and practice that's getting you there. So usually there's a dysfunctional belief or an unhealthy belief or habit or practice that is probably fear-based at its root. If you dig down deep enough, as Emily said, it's probably a fear-related belief. And you have to acknowledge it, because if you don't acknowledge that is there and creating havoc in your life, you cannot change it. Next, you challenge that belief, and then you incorporate different strategies and you experiment with them and see what works. But you have to go through this process again and again, because those habits just keep bubbling back up. This is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, and this process is embedded in all of all of our behavioral change modules. And then that just takes time and patience and practice. You have to do it over and over again, but it gets easier and easier with time. And I would just add a last word of advice, which I think is super important. It might be even more important than that process, is to remember that all challenge and loss is also the gateway to learning, growth, and grace. And if we just allow ourselves to feel defeated and depressed by challenge and loss, even if we're just struggling with stress, right? That is our pathway to growth. And I feel like the good thing about our challenging times is it's almost an imperative that we change. Organizationally, it's the same process. Do this at an organizational level, and it has to start with the leadership. The leadership has to walk the walk and commit to doing this work themselves, and also committing themselves to helping others do the same thing. And related to that change, I just want to also say that, when we really embrace challenge as our gateway to growth, that we can see ourselves as a hero, not a victim. And so we can all then grow to be our brightest, most brilliant selves.
Lovely.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, I want to underline the piece about the organizational support is that in our organization exploratory program, they're all all those organizations are led by people who were graduates of the inner development program. So they've had a personal experience, and now they're taking it and saying, hey, I think we want to have everybody get access to this. So they bring it to their organization. But you're absolutely right, the very strategic steps to take. And it starts with recognizing that there's an issue. And it also starts with some employees, people coming together and saying, hey, could we have someone come in and do massage on our, once a week, that we could take 15 minutes out of our day and go and have, or can we do a yoga class in our staff room? I mean, can be very simple. Those kinds of steps have been taken for years, but we have to know now that it's not just an add-on extra. Wouldn't it be nice to have? It's an imperative. We have to have it.
I would agree. Changing organizational culture in particular is an evolutionary, not a revolutionary process, generally speaking, or at least on an individual organization by organization basis. And one of the things I'm wondering, and Natalie, you may have some thoughts on this as well from all the organizations you work with, are kind of, we've talked a good deal, I think, on like practical tips for individuals who are trying to do this work by themselves. And certainly you've given us wonderful references. I know, Susanna, you put up your website, Addie, on the chat. If Nancy, if you haven't had a chance to do that, I hope you will. And then we'll send out everybody all the references in our follow-up email following this convening. But meanwhile, do you have practical tips for collective staff to address these kind of needs and advocate for them within their respective organizations, and also with boards and also donors? This is going to be a new area for donors to try and address. And as it's an administrative issue, or it will be seen as such, I suspect, it's really hard to get donors to fork over monies, let's say, toward administrative efforts. So how can organizations, how can, as I said, collective employees within organizations work toward this?
Yeah, good question. Well, actually, to do with the funder community, Black Fox Philanthropy and Need Global, also based in Boston, we had a summer soiree last night. And the thing that was so cool about it was, like, we're wired for connection and community. And so being able to be in the hard work, but in it together, really is powerful. And we all, we need that sense of belonging. First and foremost, I think, to Nancy and Susanna's points, is belonging to ourselves and our own well-being, but then also being part of a larger community is a huge contributor to well-being. To do with Black Fox Philanthropy and a lot of the leaders that we serve. I mean, for us, it's about a culture of care. It's a mindset of scaling deep and ensuring the roots of the organization are healthy. And that means that culturally we have each other's backs. Part of our hiring practices now is using Adam Grant's framework of give and take. It's heaven on earth for givers. Takers are good fakers, but they're a cancer in the organization. So we've had to address that, like, who are we letting into this healthy organism? And so better screening and better process around hiring. But we didn't really do this well until we implemented the Shingo model for operational excellence. And we hired a fantastic consultant, Taryn Davis, and she really helped us retrofit infrastructure after we grew so quickly. And so 2023 is called the year of excellence and ease. And we're all breathing like so beautifully. I mean, it's not that the work isn't hard. It absolutely is. It's not ease like easy, but how we do it is with excellence and ease versus, we would deliver with the bow on it in terms of, our client deliverables, but behind the scenes, it was like wreckage trying to get it to that beautiful place to present. It took a staggering toll. Again, we didn't have the infrastructure to handle it. But from that foundation, we can tend to our culture of well-being far more intentionally. And one of the things that I really wanted to do that I thought just came up so acutely during COVID was I wanted us to create a well-being operating. We're open source. So everything that we do and think about and do in fundraising and more, we make available to the sector in trainings or webinars or whatever the case may be, and not like half content, half marketing. Now you have to work with us. Like, we know so many organizations can't afford to engage us, which is why we're working with more and more foundations on capacity building grants. But so we made it open source. So what I really wanted to do when we have the bandwidth, and maybe this is more of a well-being project, but a well-being operating system for other social change leaders to adopt within their own organizations based upon the learning journey so much of us have gone on in our own worlds. And my understanding of the Wellbeing Project is absolutely addressing some of those things, like having these conversations in bigger arenas, and so can, you know, an actionable for the individual, but also collectively for organizations and more, to have more and more healthy organizations, sustainable organizations, and more. So I defer to Nancy on that, but I think one of the things that we would love to do once we is to articulate a well-being operating system and then share it out with the sector.
I think that's an excellent idea, because there aren't particularly for organizations models out there, at least that I'm aware of. Susanna and Nancy, you may be much more aware than I am, but Natalie, you're pretty well aware yourself, even though you don't work directly in this space, and you're indicating that you haven't seen any. So I think development of something like that would be tremendous, using the resources that you just mentioned. Additionally, I would like to add something that occurred to me while you were speaking, which is in order to get like executive buy-in and at the top levels, and board buy-in in particular, for this kind of a thing, I think it is that from the executive standpoint, I know there's a huge amount of burnout, particularly in the development community, for fundraising, where people, their average time now in a position is 18 months or less. And so to say, if there's greater ability to overcome this burnout, if there's a greater ability for self-care of employees, or that we do things even as simple as what I think it was Nancy that said, have a massage therapist come in once a month and do like some shoulder massages for people, is not a waste of money that's not going to programs. It's actually something that would help retain employees, not just because, oh, I got my shoulders rubbed, but would help find ways to alleviate stress that would create a longer dynamic in holding a position, which keeps the executive team from having to go out and constantly rehire, retrain a development officer. It takes them a whole year in their position just to get accustomed to the timing of what grants and which individuals need to be applied to when and where and how, and getting to know personalities, and then bam, they leave and you have to start all over again. So that it could actually forward the work of an organization, both from a fundraising standpoint and from a time-saving standpoint for the executives who do the hiring for each type of position. So that would be another thing I'd note that could be done, that would be something, again, could be done from within staff without having to hire outside consultants. Any other comments on this, or other tips for people individually, or or for staffs in general, from any of you ladies?
Well, I'll chime in and just say that, you know, really being part of helping shape a caring culture that's concerned with the whole person, because the topic of well-being is so in the mainstream at this point. I don't think I'm in a bubble. I think it really is in the mainstream. In fact, it's one of the reasons. So having that radical candor and being able to say SOS, a culture where it's safe to say SOS.
Yes.
Like I tell our team, like, we're not making widgets. It matters very much that we show up, how we show up in the work. And so we've, you know, there's a buddy, like there's a whole infrastructure around making sure people feel seen, supported, and more, and that it's a culture where it's okay. It's okay. It's actually applauded to say SOS. And we have there's like with my amazing COO, Lisa Heiner, shout out. our first check-in with our weekly meetings is, are you above the line or are you below the line? And that's a whole framework. I'll find it and send it to you. It's a 3-minute video, and we start our meetings with, are you above the line or are you below the line? If you're below the line, it means you're contracted, more pessimistic. If you're above the line, you're creative. So that alone just kind of sets like, okay, so our next meeting, I know you're below the line. So I'm going to look at it through that. I'm going to know that through that lens. And next week you'll be above the line, you know. So we used to have well-being scores, like on a scale from 1 to 10, it's like, oh God, I'm a 3 SOS. Okay, what do we need to do to get you to a 6? So we used to have that conversation, but now we've adopted the above the line, below the line model, which I like. And so we have that, the director of the consulting program, like that, we have that with our, you know, we have a team of 40 all over the world and different cultures and contexts and more. And so how do we take care of that within the cultural context, especially Africa, where mental health is, you know, any show of mental stress is taboo.
Yes.
So the US, you know, we're dealing with also cultural things of like, no, we want to be in deep community and conversation with you so that there is that sense of safety. Again, we're not making widgets, so it's hugely clear in the hiring and onboarding process as well.
Yes, and I would say, as is usually the case, that dynamic between Africa and the US is more parallel than one might think. Not you, but the general public. We just we shove it under a barrel as well, and there is a lot of fear around saying that somebody has somebody is going through their own mental health issue, and in fact, Susanna and I were talking about that yesterday. But and the idea of trying to find safe people, especially in the workplace, that you feel you can talk to, and not be looked down upon as, oh, they're unstable, maybe we should take them off that key assignment, or we should maybe even in right to work states fire them, that kind of thing. There can that's an additional fear factor and stressor that needs to be needs to be adapted to.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call this, because again, we're tip of the iceberg, and we could go on having this conversation, I think, for another hour and still be mining up gems. And so thank you. I'm gonna start just by saying thank you to all three of you, Natalie, Susanna, and Nancy, for your time today. I do want to open up the floor for a few minutes to some questions. I think I know some people had to like cut this off. Some of our attendees might have had to cut this off right at an hour, but I have not seen any questions so far in the chat box. Emily Rice, have you found any questions that I've missed from other people? And if there aren't any, does anyone currently attending feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question?
I have to hop. I put a comment in the chat, and I'll also say, you know, I just noticed I'm the only Black woman that I see on the screen, and there's a lot to be said about that. And look at the blog post I've written if you want, and feel free to connect with me to talk more, because I really do want to be a bridge, and we really have a big rupture going on, and I would love to just be helpful. I'll throw my email in here for whatever it's worth. Thank you for letting me be on. I don't remember how I heard about this, maybe through OC, Natalie, but thank you. I appreciate it. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend.
Our pleasure. And thank you for attending, Rosella. It was wonderful to have you with us. Thank you. I'll let you go. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask while they're here and while we have our speakers here today? I am going to say we unearthed so much information, and we've given so many good references that are in the chat box, and that again we'll send out with our follow-up for this convening to all the attendees, that we probably covered a pretty fair amount of territory in an hour. So I'm going to thank again Susanna and Nancy and Natalie. You all gave such fabulous information, and we so appreciate your willingness to come and spend this hour with us to help inform everyone in our circles more on this issue and give them some assistance.